So I'd just like to start off by welcoming everyone and just acknowledging I'm dialing in here from the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people on the banks of the Swan River in Perth, and just acknowledge that they remain the traditional owners of their lands, and they continue to practice their values, languages and beliefs and knowledge, and just invite each of you to reflect on the traditional owners of the lands that you're dialing in from as well. So my name is Ian Murray. I'm the chair of the Charity Law Association of Australia and New Zealand, which has purposes of advancing the education of its members and the public in charity law, as well as improving the administration of charities by contributing to the development of reform and improvement of charity law. It's a real pleasure to welcome many members, but also many non-members of CLAANZ for this webinar today, which is looking at payday super and other common issues. And it's one of the most significant changes that we've had in terms of what you're required to do as an employer and what you might expect as an employee for superannuation in quite some time. And we're just conscious that many charities, particularly smaller charities, not-for-profit organisations, this is a big change, and they've probably got quite a few questions about what it all means, and it's starting soon on 1 July. So it's an opportunity really to sort of find out what it all means and ask questions that you have. In terms of the format, we're very lucky. Deputy Commissioner Emma Rosenzweig is going to be presenting. She will talk for about 30 minutes. And then we've got time for questions that you might have about what the payday super measures and other common superannuation issues are. So I might introduce Deputy Commissioner Emma Rosenzweig. She is the Deputy Commissioner and the Senior Accountable Officer for the Payday Super program. So we're very lucky to have her, obviously with the Australian Taxation Office. She's worked there for over 25 years in a range of roles across most areas of the organisation, including client engagement roles focused on small business and employers, legal roles including design and drafting of legislation, and leadership of the ATO's service strategy design and implementation as well. Emma, it's a real pleasure. We're very thankful that you're here talking to us today. I might hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ian, for that intro, and thanks to everybody for joining and taking a real interest in learning about Payday Super. I'm joining you from Tantanya, which we all know as Adelaide, on the lands of the Kaurna people, and so I'd like to pay my respects to them as well. So Payday Super, 7 sleeps to go now, which for me, who's been talking about this for a long time, many years, feels a little bit unreal. So it does start on 1 July, which is next Wednesday. And what it means, as Ian said, it's a big change. It means that employers will have to pay super contributions for their staff at the same time they pay salary and wages. So really needing to think about super much more like you think about salary and wages. It applies to all employers, and it's all employers have to start at the same time. So if you were familiar with single touch payroll changes, they were staggered. This is not staggered. The point of Payday Super, so the reason that it is being introduced, it's really a couple of reasons. One is to start contemporising the super system, which was introduced in 1992. For those of us who remember 1992, a lot of people were still using cheques, pieces of paper. We didn't have choice of fund, and so things were much simpler, but also much more manual. I think in the current environment, there's a lot of changed expectations by consumers that things are much more instantaneous and things work faster. And so a contemporary system should be working in more real time. But also we do have a big problem at the moment with unpaid superannuation. We estimate there's about $6.2 billion a year that doesn't get paid in super contributions, which is a really big dent to future retirement savings of Australians. And so the idea of addressing some of the drivers of that by encouraging businesses to pay smaller amounts more frequently and keep on top of those obligations is part of the rationale for Payday Super. The other thing I'll say is that it isn't just something that your payroll team should think about. You'll hear as I talk through what it involves. It will involve things like HR function if you have a separate one, but thinking about your HR functions, particularly with onboarding of new employees, might involve any tax compliance advice that you have, and it's a really important governance responsibility. So those people involved in your governance, whether you have audit and risk committees, will also be interested in how Payday Super works. It really does make you think about your business processes. So some of the things we've been talking about on this slide, we've been talking to employers about what they should be doing to prepare, and hoping by now most employers have really started preparing, given it's only a week away. But the things we've been telling businesses to do are really think about business processes that might need to change to be ready to pay super on each payday. So, for example, if you're a business who has had someone running your payroll every week, perhaps, but you have your bookkeeper come in once a quarter to pay your super, that process isn't going to work for Payday Super. So you may need to think about how you're going to change those processes to bring those two things together. We've also, I'm sorry, I can just hear someone who's not on mute. I can hear some typing, so I wonder if people could just check they're on. The other thing we've been talking to businesses about is making plans for their cash flow. Payday Super is a deliberate disruption to the way people have managed cash flow for superannuation. It is intended to encourage businesses to deal with smaller, more frequent contributions to super in an effort to help them keep on top of those payments. But it does mean that businesses and employers will have to plan for that cash flow impact. We're also talking to people about knowing where their error messages might come from if they've made a super payment through their clearinghouse or to a fund and it gets rejected. Know where those rejections happen. And we have been encouraging employers to really think about if they're getting error messages now, try and get on top of them, understand what's causing them, and see if you can resolve that before 1 July, so that once you get into a much faster paced process from 1 July, you don't have to deal with so many errors. If you are an employer who is using the ATO Small Business Super Clearinghouse to make your contributions, and that might be some of you or some of your clients on the line today, this service is closing midnight on 30 June. So you've got 7 days left to download any of your records from that service, and it is important you go and download any records because it will not be accessible after that point in time. And also, if you were hoping to make your June quarter payment using the clearinghouse, we need to have received those funds by 30 June because it will be closed after that. So you won't have until the 28th of July to be making those contributions. So not long to go now, but that's something we have been warning employers about for a while. We've had notices up in the clearinghouse. The very final thing at a headline level we've been talking to employers about is to look at the payroll software they use to report through to Single Touch Payroll. There will be some updates to that. I think all products now have released their updates for Payday Super. And so having a look at whether you need to make some changes in what you are reporting through Single Touch Payroll will be important. I'll touch on those a little bit later, but knowing that that's something you need to think about is important. So if we go to the next slide, I thought I would start with some the basics of Payday Super. What does it change? What doesn't it change? So who do you have to pay and when? So as I said, from 1 July, you have to make super contributions at the same time you pay salary and wages. The legislation technically requires that those contributions arrive within an employee super fund within 7 days of paying their salary and wages. But we are encouraging employers, sorry, my lights have gone off. Encouraging employers to actually make those payments on payday to make sure there is enough time for payment processing to go through, but also if there are any errors, enough time for those errors to come back. Payday Super is not changing who is entitled to superannuation. The same people who are entitled to super now will be entitled to super on payday. There are some extensions to that 7-day due date. They apply where it is the first time you are paying a super contribution for a new employee, or where you are paying to a new fund for an existing employee. And in those cases, you have 20 days from payday to get the contribution into a fund. There is also scope in the law for the Commissioner to make an exceptional circumstances determination to provide that 20 days to apply as well. And the intention is that that is used in scenarios perhaps where there's been a natural disaster or something like that, which we know will really interrupt an employee's ability to perhaps access their systems and make those payments. So it's put in there to give us some flexibility for circumstances that are genuinely unforeseen, broad-scale impact, and genuinely going to impact employers' abilities to make contributions. If we go to the next slide, as I said, Payday Super isn't changing who is eligible for super. It is changing when super contributions are paid. So we have had lots of questions about contractors. Some contractors are entitled to super now. So if a contractor is a deemed employee for super purposes, they also are entitled to have contributions reach their super fund within 7 days after their invoice is paid. We've got some points there about to remind you of contractors that are entitled to super. So they are people who are working under a contract that is wholly or principally for their labour. It also includes payments to people who are sports people, artists or entertainers who are paid to perform or present music, entertainment, sport activities. It also includes private domestic workers who are engaged for more than 30 hours a week. So those conditions have been there for a very long time. They are not changing under Payday Super, but sometimes they are not well understood. This slide really talks to, though, that point I made before about business processes and thinking about your business process. Because the contractors who are entitled to super are entitled to have it arrive in their fund 7 days from when you pay them. You really need to think about what your business processes are when you're paying contractors now and whether that is going to work. So we do hear from people saying, well, someone just goes in and pays the invoices as they come through, and once a quarter my bookkeeper tidies that all up and makes any of the super payments we need to make. That again, that process will not work for Payday Super. Next slide, please. So one of the things the legislation for Payday Super has done is introduce this term called qualifying earnings. So you will see that throughout the legislation. And in fact, I've been talking about payday here. If you actually look at the law will talk about a qualifying earnings day. So that's a day you make a payment that's treated as qualifying earnings. Given I'm talking to a bunch of lawyers, I think I can more confidently talk about some of these definitional things in the law. And it's doing it for the purpose of wrapping up a number of concepts into one term. So that's why the law talks about the day you pay an amount of qualifying earnings, and the contribution has to be received by super fund within 7 days of a qualifying earnings payment. But in most cases, this terminology is not going to change the base on which you calculate super. So qualifying earnings is wrapping up the concept of ordinary times earnings, but also the other things that were currently in the Super Guarantee Act that are entitled to super. So things like salary sacrifice, super contributions, or payments to contractors that are added in to entitlements to super guarantee. So all of those things still exist. Ordinary times earnings as a concept still exists, but it, along with all those other things, directors' fees, salary sacrifice contributions, commissions, is wrapped up into this term qualifying earnings. So the requirement to make super contributions in the new legislation will be 12% of qualifying. But as I said, for most people, this will not change the amount that they have to pay for super. But conceptually, it's important to understand that that terminology has changed. You will see it if you go to the new piece of legislation. We have got some what I think is good, helpful information about qualifying earnings on our website. And we've tried to break it down to be very practical into the way people will need to think about it in their payroll software, how different types of allowances or different types of payments that we know are very common might be interpreted as either ordinary times earnings or qualifying earnings. So if you are confused or if you aren't sure, I would encourage you to go and have a look at that information to find out whether amounts you are paying are wrapped up into super obligations. We might go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, there's one point on the last slide I want to make. You don't need to go back a slide, but I will just cover this. We have been asked questions about, I talked about the obligation to pay super is 12% of qualifying earnings. We've been asked questions about what if we pay more than 12%? So I don't know if this applies to any of you, but it may for some. We know that some enterprise agreements or some individual contracts actually offer employees more than 12% in superannuation as part of their remuneration benefits. For the ATO's perspective, we can only enforce the minimum super guarantee amount, which is the 12%. So when we get the data and match it up, if you are paying more than 12%, in our systems, that will effectively carry forward as a credit up to 12 months. And so it will offset any future technical super guarantee obligations that you have. So you'll always be ahead from our perspective. What you do need to be careful of is, though, you will still have other legal obligations to make those payments. So just because the ATO can't enforce the amounts over 12% doesn't mean they are not enforceable, you're not liable to them. So while you might look like you're ahead from our perspective, you will still have those obligations to your employees to pay those amounts. But it is something we've been asked about how that will work in our systems. So I said there was some changes to single touch payroll reporting. So this is the reporting that you are doing regularly each payday to let us know who you are paying and what you are paying them in terms of salary and wages. There will be some small changes to single touch payroll, which mean that we will be asking employers to report both qualifying earnings amount and the super liability for each employee. And this is to ensure that the ATO can actually work out the correct amount of super guarantee obligation and that we can match that against the contributions information we get from super funds to make sure that the right amount has been paid. We are also asking employers to check that the ABN that they use in single touch payroll to report their salary and wages matches the ABN that they use in their contributions file when they send the contributions off to a super fund. And so we have seen in some instances with perhaps a grouped employer or if there are other service providers making your super contributions, that the ABN that the super contributions are paid under is different. That makes it very hard for us to match up that data and work out if you've paid the right amount. So we are asking employers to make sure that those two systems use the same ABN. That will save us coming and annoying you and nagging you if we can't find the super contributions reported by the super funds. And it looks like to us that those payments haven't been made. And it will certainly save you work as well if we do have to come and ask questions about those what appear to be missing payments. The other things that we are talking to employers about to make sure, and this is where your HR systems really need to be involved in this as well, is checking that your employee super fund details are up to date. So if you have been getting error messages, the most common error messages that employers get and the most common rejection reasons for contributions is that their details aren't up to date. So please, if you have been getting error messages, check your employees' super fund details and really think about the onboarding processes you have for employees so you've got those details right up front and you can get going straight away. We have, as part of Payday Super, really thought about what are some of the irritants in the system for employers and how could we overcome them. And so there are actually some changes in what's called SuperStream, which are the data and payment standards that apply to super funds. And so they are that super funds now will all have to be able to accept payments through the new payments platform. And so as service providers like your clearinghouse, like your software, start to enable NPP functionality, that makes for much faster payment processing from an employer's bank account into the super fund. We are seeing some contributions now already using this, and they're going on the same day. And so that is one of the big irritants we know that employers have, that it takes a long time. There's also improved error messaging that's been introduced, where super funds will have to give better error messages back to employers if they are rejecting a payment, so that you have better chance of fixing them. And they're going to have to reject any contributions that they can't allocate within 3 days. So much quicker turnaround on rejecting errors. And the last thing that funds are introducing that should really help employers is a new service called the Member Verification Request. And this is particularly useful when you are onboarding a new employee. It will let you actually send a message to the super fund with the details you've got from that employee to check those details are right before you actually have to make a contribution. So really good thing to use in your onboarding process to check that you've got all the right details before you actually have to start making contributions and potentially getting anything rejected. All right, next slide covers the new super guarantee charge. So hopefully none of you will ever have to interact with this because you'll always pay on time. But if an employer doesn't make payments on time or doesn't make payments in full, then the super guarantee charge applies. While it's called the same thing as a former super guarantee charge, there have been some big changes to the way this works under Payday Super. So the new super guarantee charge will include an individual final shortfall amount, which is the amount that was unpaid. And this is now calculated in the same way the original contributions were calculated. So formerly, the SG shortfall would have been calculated on salary and wages, but they are now both calculated on the qualifying earnings base. The next component of the charge is notional earnings, which is to compensate your employees for any lost fund earnings while the amount wasn't in their fund. There is an administrative uplift, which is an extra charge to reflect the cost of enforcement and encourage employers to make voluntary disclosures if they have not paid the correct amount, which starts at 60%, but it can be reduced by the ATO. That is something that we have the power to remit. And then, as before, there is a choice loading if, in the circumstances where an employer has not offered choice of fund employment, which has been in existence. There is no longer a late payment offset. So under the new Payday Super laws, the law actually sets the order that contributions are applied in, applying it to the earliest possible date first. And the other thing that's really important is that this new law gives much more flexibility if an employer realises they've missed a payment or they've underpaid. If the ATO has not come and raised an assessment yet, to make that payment directly to the fund, and that late payment will go to offset any liabilities. So really much more flexibility, that the goal is to get contributions to a fund for an employee as fast as possible. The new super guarantee charge will be tax deductible, which the old one was not, so that's a change. And then if the ATO has assessed super guarantee charge and it remains unpaid, then we have general interest charge that applies. And if it continues to remain unpaid after the ATO issues a further notice to pay, then there are late payment penalties apply, and we have no discretion to remit those penalties. They are quite punitive, and they are a very deliberate decision by government to encourage payment on time of any late amounts. Next slide, please, and we will talk about our approach during the first year. So I said this starts in 7 days. What happens if you haven't got everything perfect on day one? So we recognise that payroll is complex, that this is a new thing. While Software now all has released their updates for single touch payroll, some of them have not been out for very long. We know employers may need a bit more time to work through that and get their reporting right. And so we've had to think about how would we approach our regulatory stance, our compliance stance in the first year of Payday Super. One thing I will say is we have had about 45% of employers already paying their super contributions more regularly than quarterly. So there is actually nothing stopping, there's no system barrier or fund barrier stopping an employer paying super on payday. And so when we've thought about our compliance approach, we are expecting from 1 July employers to be able to start paying their contributions on payday. What we recognise is that might not go perfectly every time. You might get some errors when you contribute to a fund. A fund might reject some of the data. You might not get your reporting in single touch payroll perfect straight away. And so we've released a practical compliance guideline that talks about employers who are paying on payday and fix any issues that arise quickly won't be the focus of any compliance action by us. Those employers who don't start paying on payday, who stay with a quarterly regime, or who, heaven forbid, don't pay at all, don't have the same guarantee of no compliance action. However, we absolutely will be taking some nudges and supportive approaches before we raise any assessments for any of those employers. So we really are encouraging people to pay super guarantee late if you realise in the beginning that you've missed a payment or you haven't quite made it on time, but really encouraging people to say, we recognise that people may take some time to get it humming at the velocity it's going to need to work. I will just mention there is the ability in the first year to make a voluntary disclosure. So there's no longer an obligation for you to lodge a super guarantee assessment. If you realise you've paid late, you can make a voluntary disclosure. They are genuinely voluntary. They get factored in if the ATO raises an assessment into that administrative component I talked about. We can use those to remit. However, as I said, in the first year, if you think you fall in our low risk zone, you've been paying on time and you're fixing errors quickly, we won't be raising assessments for you, and therefore you can think about whether you really need to lodge voluntary disclosures in those circumstances, because we won't be automatically raising any assessments from a voluntary disclosure either. We have actually just today published some more web content to support this practical compliance guideline about what our compliance approach is going to be during the first year. So it's really complementary to this PCG and does try to address a lot of the frequently asked questions that we've been getting on this. So would encourage you to also go and have a look at that. I've got some links at the end of the presentation to where you can find all that material on our website. So I know we're getting up to the half-hour mark. I've got a couple more slides that I will cover. So if we can go to the next one. We've also got some information on our website about how to manage things during the changeover during July. So we know during July this year is going to be a fairly critical period for employers, particularly because you may have multiple payments due. You will have super payments due on a payday basis for every payday that falls in July. But you might also have your final June quarter payment due by the 28th of July. So really important to think about how you're going to meet your obligations for all of those contributions in July and how you're going to start reporting. So we have got some extra material up on our website there. What we are also saying is that if you are not able to start reporting qualifying earnings and super liability in single touch payroll straight away. So because you may need to map some pay codes differently, and that's going to depend a lot on what software you're using and what they require you to do to update that. There's no need to come to us and ask for a deferral for STP reporting. We're asking you to start reporting those as soon as possible in the 26-27 year. However, we are letting people know from 1 July 2027, if you don't report those amounts, your STP reporting will be rejected. So it is really important that you get on top of that changeover as soon as possible. My last slide is just a reference to our resources that we have available on the website. So we have a number of checklists, we have a number of fact sheets. We also have quite a few webinars and videos up there, which might be helpful to you. We've delivered webinars for tax professionals and employers and super funds. And so if you want to watch some more detail, they might be useful to you if you need a bit more information. But we also have a lot of web content and guidance that is available, as I said, about the changeover and the new material about our compliance approach in the first year. So encourage you to go and have a look at that and refer to that if you do need more information. But with that, I will stop and very happy to take questions, either if people want to put their hand up or pop questions into the chat.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. So we do have some time for questions. So if you have got one, yes, please feel free to raise your hand.
Maybe this is a good sign that we've done a few of these, and so every time we get questions, and we've tried to build some more content in to try and cover the common things that people have been asking us. So maybe this is a good sign that I've managed to cover off.
Exactly.
Maybe I could do a poll and ask for hands up. Who feels ready for Payday Super? Maybe pop your hand up if you feel ready. Ooh, at least one couple going up. Reasonable that a few hands have gone up, maybe a few hands didn't. So if you've still got your hand up, have you got a question?
King, I think you have a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Emma, for that presentation. That's the first thing I wanted to say. My question is, I heard you earlier in your presentation talk about closely held employees. Could you expand on what that means? Because I think in superannuation, we're used to the language around employees and deemed employees, so could you expand on what you mean by closely held employees?
Yeah, sure. So we often see businesses who employ mum and dad run the business and mum and dad work in the business. And sometimes mum and dad might decide at the end of the year, or maybe at the end of each quarter, that the money they've drawn from the business, how they're going to account for that. So whether that's going to be drawings or whether that's going to be director's fees or whether they're going to treat it as salary and wages. And so often we are aware that they make those decisions with their accountant. And so they are the closely held employees that I'm referring to. So they're effectively owners of the business or those family members. Sometimes they have other employees as well. And obviously they're treating them much more arm's length basis where they're paying them wages regularly. So we have been asked the question about how will Payday Super work those closely held if they don't decide until, say, the end of the quarter whether the money they've withdrawn from the should be salary and wages. Unfortunately, this is going to mean they're going to need to make decisions in a more real-time way because the Payday Super rules will still apply to them. So if they've taken money out throughout July and they don't decide till October that they're going to treat that as salary and wages, then they will be late for the super contributions for them. And so, yeah, that's what we're referring to seeking.
Thank you.
And I know Seeking and I were corresponding about a few issues that are related to these questions, and one was about charities, non-profits using ambassadors, so sort of well-recognised people often who might actually get other people along to an event. Should charities, non-profits be thinking about superannuation if they pay a speaking fee, or it might not be quite as overt as that? They might provide sort of a very nice gift or something like that to the ambassador. I guess we're just sort of wondering, how broadly or deeply should charities be thinking about super obligations in those sort of circumstances?
Yeah, look, I think so. The answer to the question doesn't change because of Payday Super. And so it's something that is really worth thinking about. Are these people, have they always been entitled to super contributions on their payments? It's going to depend a bit on what the arrangement is, but you heard me before talk about artists, performers. I think, professional speakers come into that. We have got a ruling. I know this is a terrible answer. Go and read our ruling. We have got a ruling and more information about contract in people you've engaged under a contract and whether or not they would fall under the deemed employee rules for superannuation. And so, it's probably a hard one to answer in a generality here. But yes, if you are paying a speaker for a performance effectively, then they probably will fall under those rules of being a deemed employee. If you are paying directors fees, directors fees are entitled to superannuation as well. I think a nice bottle of wine is probably safe, though.
Thank you. Are there other questions that people have? Oh, Seeking, you've got another question.
Yes, I do. Emma, can you give us some indication about what you consider to be low-risk categories in terms of your enforcement focus through the first year? Is it by size? Is it by sector that your organisation is in? Can you say something about how you view charities and not-for-profits?
Yeah, so when we talk about low risk, so this is where we've published our compliance guideline. We say employers that are low risk are those employers who are paying on payday and fixing errors quickly. And so we're not looking at it by industry, we're not looking at it by size, it's about behaviour. So when I say paying on payday, I've been asked questions about, well, what if I pay and my service providers, my clearinghouse still takes a long time and the contribution gets there on day 9 instead of day 7. Will that be low risk? And for me, if there's a regular pattern of that person paying the right amount on or about payday and it's getting there on day 9 every time, that would be considered low risk in that first year. So this is I'm talking about in the first year. So charities may range in the spectrum from low risk right through to high risk. High risk employers we've described as those employers just not paying super contributions at all. I hope no charities fall in that case, but you never know. So those employers just not paying super at all are classified as high risk, and just like now will be a focus for us for compliance action. And then, of course, we've got in the middle, medium risk, people who fall in between there. So we imagine there will be some employers who don't move to a payday cycle and actually maybe still continue to pay quarterly, maybe even for the first couple of quarters of the year. They will be considered that they're certainly not low risk for us. So there is a risk that we will take compliance action. But for those employers, we'll really work with them first to try to understand why they've paid quarterly and why they haven't shifted, and make sure we can help them move into this payday cycle before we take too firm compliance action with them. So that's how we've set it out in the guideline. We're really looking at behaviour seeking as to how we see risk.
Thank you.
Well, people are quiet.
Everyone might have an early minute, Ian.
That's right. And I think you've done a very good job, clearly, of explaining the changes and why people should care about them and what they should be thinking about doing. So a huge thanks to you again for devoting your time to helping educate us and the sector more broadly about these changes. We really do appreciate it. Perhaps if people can just join me in thanking Deputy Commissioner Rosenzweig for talking to us today. Seeking if we can, thank you. Just a quick reminder about upcoming events. Before I move on to that, I should also say a big thanks to Sea King, who is the moving force in arranging today's presentation. So huge thanks to Sea King for organising this. We really appreciate all of your work as well, Sea King. Just a quick update on upcoming Charity Law Association events. There is the annual conference 23 to 24 July in Sydney on the topic of toward solutions, pressing issues in charity law. If you would like to see the program, the link is on the slide, so you can have a look there. We also have some upcoming webinars. There'll be one on privacy and data breaches, ideally learning from the Oxfam experience. That will probably be in late August. And then we're also organising a webinar on the new Community Foundation model, just trying to unpack that a little bit as well. Toward the end of the year, normally in November, again, the date hasn't been set yet, but it will be sometime around November. There's an annual lecture and John Emerson oration, so there'll be more details coming out on that. And then you've got some links there if you would like to stay tuned so that you can actually find out the details about when these events will be coming up. So a big thanks to everyone for dialing in, and also to Deputy Commissioner Rosenzweig for the wonderful talk today. Thank you. We've been very efficient. The recording will be available for those who would like. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. See ya.